Get my 6. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the greatest homesteading channel on the internet that has nothing to do with homesteading. I know, right? You couldn't plan something like that, or at least I couldn't. It's not bad spending your life falling into piles of crap and coming out smelling like a rose. Anyway, I guess what they say, God looks out for fools and America and I guess me. I'm giving you a different view in the backdrop here today. That's the house way down there. It's about 300 yards away. The trail going down. I'm usually in the woods over there. But I got set up to tell the story, and there were these breezes whipping up, and it was like it was raining beautiful leaves back here, and so I'm hoping that continues to happen while I read the story so you get to see that in the background. But don't worry, all this down here is wooded. This is all woods. This is a grown-up meadow, and again, there's a good 300 yards down there. You never know who or what you may or may not see in the backdrop, so keep watching. That's what Get My 6 means. So this story, we're going back to October Nights, part 1. Since it is the 12th, we're going to read from the 12th. It's called Meeting of the Minds. This is one of those stories that is so creepy because it's true. And there's a story after the story that I'll tell you about after I read it. I didn't put it in here. But when I was flipping through the books, of course, what you can get on Amazon in print or Kindle, autographed copies from the Etsy store. The links are in the description box. And don't forget about these. The True Hauntings. And we've been reading some of the stories some of our viewers have been sending in that have been published in the True Haunting stories this October too. If you have a story, a paranormal story, something weird, strange you can't explain, you can send it to the channel. The email address is crazylake@mail.com, and with your permission we'll read it on the channel, consider it, or put it in an upcoming publication. We've already got tons of stories submitted for True Hauntings Volume 5, so send us your story if you got one. But anyway, I was just flipping through the October Nights, and I came across the story for today's date, and I got chills just remembering that night. So you're going to enjoy this one. It's one of those things like the old mountain man, my old friend, the greatest storyteller I've ever heard, PJ, would say, the reason the story's so good is because it doesn't really make a lot of sense and you can't explain it. Meeting of the Minds. Here are some of the things I've learned so far in life. Never take parenting advice from people who do not have children. Never take financial advice from people who don't have money. And never talk about things that happened in combat zones with people who never fought in combat zones. The first two issues and issues like them aren't too big a deal when people start flapping their gums about their opinions. But that last one, that's different because that is very personal and often painful. You learn pretty quick after getting home from the war not to talk about it with people who were never in war, because there's nothing like pouring your soul out to someone about maybe some of the things you saw, did, or heard, or others seen or doing over there, only to have the person you told these things to look at you and tell you that you're a liar afterward. And it happens. People will say, my grandpa served in World War II and he never talked about it, so I think you were lying. Hell, you probably weren't even in the military. The danger with this is that when these people say these things, you want to punch them in the throat. But you're not in a combat zone anymore, and throat punching is looked down on by the police. They'd probably call the police if you did punch them in the throat, if they were able to get back up. Anyway, you learn. It just isn't worth the negative emotions associated with telling someone who obviously suffers from veteran envy. By the way, that's a term that I believe I invented because I've never heard it. I've never heard anyone else use it. Everything or even anything that happened while you were in combat. And then there are others who mean well, I believe, but who still tell you how they would have done it if they were there. How you did it wrong and how they would have done things so differently. The thing is, you have no clue what you do in combat unless you were in combat. So that's never a pleasant conversation to have either. This is all relevant because I have two best good buddies who served in war who I can talk to these things about. We don't get together frequently, maybe once a quarter, but our get-togethers always prove to be much-needed get-togethers because every time we do get together and talk about all the things we can't even talk to our wives about, war-related, None of us are into infidelity. We do something that can only be done by doing this. We heal. A little more each time. My two friends, we'll call them Rick and Bob because that's not their real names, and I recently got together for one such meeting of the minds. We grilled meat for dinner, as we always do, chicken, shrimp, squirrel, and wild rabbit, and we did eat of the meat, and our bellies became filled with the meat that we did eat. Then we went to our family campground that we have at the top of our property. It's up there a little ways. And we built a campfire, and we sat back and told each other lies and half-truths and called each other on our bullshit, joked about war-related shit that would make civilians cringe, and then, as is always the case, we started talking about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and all things paranormal. The Bigfoot Sasquatch conversation is pretty simple to explain. You see, I have a YouTube channel called Homesteading Off the Grid, where I make a lot of videos about Bigfoot Sasquatch. You may have heard of that channel. It's like the most awesome homesteading channel on the internet that doesn't have anything to do with homesteading. I won't bore you with the details here because more than likely you already watch my channel anyway. I mean, there's a possibility. But what I'll say is we've had some really strange things happen on our property, and we believe potentially, some of it at least, might be Bigfoot Sasquatch related. One of or both of my buddies usually bring up a recent video I had made, and thus starts the decision of all things Bigfoot Sasquatch. I'm always the one to bring up the paranormal stuff with these guys because it only feels natural. I mean, we discuss one thing that may or may not be real, Bigfoot Sasquatch, and we're sitting around a campfire on a dark night consuming meat. There's no one else around to hear how insane we might sound, so why not? Pretty much, to give you the short version, neither of my friends believe too much in either, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or ghosts. Like most non-believers, their reasoning for their disbelief lies in the fact that they've never seen either. About the time we'd written off any possibility of strange things that can't be found in textbooks existing, I realized we'd run out of meat. So I took the platter we'd been keeping it on and I walked back down to the house to get more meat. When I got back up to the fire, I found that my friends' opinions on all things paranormal had changed completely. We've got to get the fuck out of here, Kevin, and down to your house right now, Bob, who's not really named Bob, said. There's a fucking bear just inside the woods and it's going to eat our meat. See, my buddies weren't scared of the bear eating them. They were both actually eating squirrel meat for the first time and they loved it. And they weren't about to share any of it with some bear. Yeah, I said, we saw that bear a few days ago. It won't bother us. Then we heard something moving in the forest just up the hill from us. There it is, Rick, whose name isn't really Rick, said. That's where we saw its eyes. You guys saw its eyes, I asked. Yeah, Bob, whose name isn't really Bob, said. We saw like this white flash in the woods just above the woodpile. Then we saw its eyes. Were the eyes green or yellow, I asked. White, my friends said in unison. Okay, I said, taking the flashlight from Rick, whose name isn't really Rick. I'd actually gone down to the house and back without one. I keep my property well maintained, mowed, and free of unnecessary obstructions, so I can walk all over it in the dark without a light, as long as there's at least a sliver of moon, and I often do. Animals' eyes reflect green or yellow at night, I said, not white. And have you ever seen an animal that can make a flash in the dark? I started heading toward the woods where we'd heard the sound. Flashlight turned on. What is it, Bob, whose name really isn't Bob, asked. It's something paranormal in nature, I said, not even looking back, but continuing to move toward the wood line. Let's get the fuck out of here and in the house, Kevin, Rick, whose name isn't really Rick, said. I stopped and turned to face in the direction of my friends, who were standing huddled together in the dark, their lawn chairs folded and tucked under their arms, and I said, that is the absolute last thing we should do. The damn thing will follow us, and it might end up doing a lot more than take our meat. My friends, obviously not even knowing how to respond, didn't. I walked into the woods, flashlight still lit, and I said, we know you're here. And that's when the flashlight went out, and I hadn't turned it off. We know that this is your land, not ours, I said. We welcome you here with us. I just ask you to please stop scaring my friends, and you are not allowed to follow us home. I then walked back down to my friends by the fire. Did you turn off that light? Bob, whose name really isn't Bob, asked. Nope, I told him, and then I clicked the power button and it came on just fine. I said, and just to see If lightning could strike twice, I headed back into the woods just behind the firewood pile we keep stacked with pine for our campfires, and I said, "We know you're here." And as soon as I was finished with the words, the light went out again. "You're welcome to stay," I continued, "but please stop scaring my friends, and when we leave, you are not allowed to go home with us." I walked back over to my friends and said, "We could probably do this all night, but let's freaking eat meat instead." We sat back down in our chairs around the fire after Rick, whose name isn't really Rick, stoked it up really good by adding more wood, and I think more so for the light, which provided greater visibility of our surroundings, than for the heat it put off, because it was a very warm summer night, and we did eat of the meat, and our bellies became full of the meat. And I told Rick, whose name isn't really Rick, and Bob, whose name isn't really Bob, one hell of a whopper of a ghost story that scared them more than the white flash and white eyes they'd seen in the woods had, and it scared them more than what they'd witnessed with the flashlight. So in time we did go back down to the house. It was getting really late anyway, and besides, we were out of meat. The end. All right. So here's the promised story after the story that is not in the book. The next day after my buddies left, they spent the night, and their wives and kids. After they left the next day, I came back up to the campground to clean up anything we'd left behind. And remembering what had happened the night before, I walked over to the wood pile, and the top of it was covered in some sort of gooey white substance like I'd never seen. And I took a picture of it, and I sent it to both of those guys. They thought that I was pranking them and that I just dumped some like white house paint on the pile of wood, but I didn't. I have no idea what it was, but it's where they saw the flash. So there you have it, another tale for October nights. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you'll come back here tomorrow at the coolest homesteading channel on the internet that has nothing to do with homesteading for another story. See ya then for more.